My name is Donna Benjamin. I run my own business called Creative Contingencies, and I really should have plugged in my power so this doesn't keep going to sleep. All right. I'm going to keep my finger on the pulse though, so we should be good. Okay, so we're talking today about stories. We're talking today about stories. User stories. Hands up if you're familiar with what a user story is. Oh, we don't need to do the talk. All right, well, bear with me. First, I always like to get a bit of a sense of who's in the room, but we don't really have time to do that, so moving right on. What is a user story? There is a template that is used in the agile world, which very tightly defines what a user story is. They usually look a bit like this. As a user, I require some function, feature, or activity so that I can. And there you provide the reason why you want that feature, function, or activity. As a user, I require so that, or so I can. These have come to replace requirements. We used to have big, long requirements documents. Well, I shouldn't say we used to. Many of us still do have very long requirements documents, and those requirements come from somewhere. User stories have been developed as a way of bringing the user back to the centre of what that requirement is all about. But we still need to get this shopping list of things that someone wants on our website. So how might we do that? There are lots of methods. I'm just going to quickly kind of gloss over a list of some of the ones that I've seen, I've used, I've been subjected to. Workshops is a good one. Actually get the people in a room together and talk about what it is that they think they want. Interviews, get more in-depth one-on-one kind of response about whatever the thing is that you're building. Really talk and really listen. Surveys, a broader base. Some general questions that you send out to a much broader audience than you'd get in a one-on-one or a workshop to perhaps test ideas that you've discovered in those workshops or interviews using surveys. Competitive analysis. So you may not actually be talking directly to your users, but you know the general industry niche, audience, community that you're building a website for. So look at other websites in that space and have a look at the kinds of things that are there. Prototype and iterate. Just build it. Ask them if it does what they need. Change it when they say it doesn't. So, what are we building? I've got 3 examples here. We could be building a conference website. We're all at a conference, so we should all have a kind of, visceral understanding of what that might be or might look like and what we might expect of it. A media sharing site, something like a YouTube. These are good examples to kind of talk about user stories because we have a common understanding of it. It's not something abstract. We can talk about it as a real example that we're familiar with. Or perhaps a research agency website. I worked on one a couple of years ago and it had some specific needs. So what is it that you're actually trying to build? That's kind of important to figuring out what the user stories might be. And then once you have this idea of what it is that you're building, who are you building it for and what are their needs? Let's drill down now a little. As a potential delegate, disclaimer here, I obviously went with the conference website example. As a potential delegate, I want to know the date of the conference, so that I can see if it suits my schedule this year. See, as a user, I want so that. Just fits that pattern. As a future speaker, I want to submit a talk proposal, so I might be invited to speak at this conference. That worked out for me. Here I am. As a conference organiser, I need to review and evaluate talk proposals so that we can create a good conference program. So far, so good? But you're all already user story experts, so this is telling you how to suck eggs, right? Yeah? I'm sorry about that. Okay, so how does this relate to Drupal? So I went through, 3 kind of obvious ones. First one was just some person who wants to go to a conference this year and wonders if this one might suit. They're not logged in. Second one was a speaker. They want to submit a talk proposal. We're going to want to get them to, log in perhaps. And the third one has probably got some elevated privs. Well, good news, Drupal has those 3 roles out of the box. Anonymous users, authenticated users, and admin users. Just there, out of the box, no configuration, nothing required. Looks like this. But see that blue button? This is Drupal 8, by the way, if you haven't seen Drupal 8 yet. The blue button is add role. So with Drupal, you can very easily craft a specific set of access controls for different kinds of users. I think this is a really nice way of looking at user stories in relation to Drupal, and that we have roles and permissions built in. And it means that you can map some of that functionality specifically into a role really easily with very little friction. Specifically, and this is just a screen grab of the very long, what can get very long and unwieldy permissions page, but you can see the anonymous users can view a comment, they're not logged in. Authenticated users have 3 ticks, they can post comments, skip comment approval, and obviously view comments. And the admin user can do absolutely everything. We might have a role that we want to add, which is a comment moderator who can then do some other things that perhaps the admin, some less things than the admin, but specifically around comments, so we can add that in quite easily. I don't have a user story in my little example there of our comment moderator, but if I did, it would be really quite trivial to add it. But again, it's going back to that user need. The user story focus is about putting the user at the centre of the task of the feature. So let's go further into another example and break it down. So we've got our conference website. We've got speakers, like me, who are going to be talking at your conference, and one of them pings you with a requirement. Pesky speakers. Requirements. All right, so as a speaker with an accepted talk, I want to share my talk on social media so that people will come to see it, like all of you. Thank you for coming. So, as the person or the team who's now building this conference website, I go, new requirement, put aside scope creep, and no, we're not doing new things now and all of that, but we want to do this. We want to do this for our speakers. So let's go a bit deeper into what that requirement might actually mean. What does it mean to be able to share this on social media? So perhaps social platform logos should appear on every page. So what I'm doing, this is just a couple of quick examples to drill down into that user story to see what it really means. And one of the key ideas with a user story is it's actually a starting point. It's the opportunity to have a conversation about what this requirement is with the user at the centre. So social platform logos should appear on every talk page. So maybe I, as the conference organiser, go back to the speaker and say, did you mean something like this? This is lanyard.com. They've got a bunch of social media logos sitting on the side, and now I'm doing that competitive analysis requirements bit, saying, well, is it kind of like this? Does this make it more concrete as to what you actually wanted? I'm in luck. My speaker says, yes, that's exactly what I wanted. Phew, no more research required. So we want to put some logos there so they can easily click and share. So then what happens if you, say, click one of those logos? Clicking on each logo should pre-populate a post with the URL and session details, kind of like this, right? So Lanyard does that, and it's brought in the name of the talk, where it is, who's speaking, and the URL, in this case back to Lanyard. So now I'm really clear that this is kind of what my speaker wanted, what the feature that they wanted. So now how do I bring that back to the Drupal world? Choosing the right contributed modules. This is one of Drupal's great strengths, is the mass of contributed modules that are out there. Now there's probably 100 of them that do 5% of what you want. That's not very useful. What you want to try and do is find the one that does at least 80% of kind of what you want. Now, fortunately, our friends in the Drupal world have put together resource guides on a bunch of things. I've just picked social media as an example because, again, we have some common familiarity in the room with what that's about. But there are resource guides for other kinds of things as well. This also happens to be an area where there is a lot of stuff, and it is frankly overwhelming. So what I've done here is a couple of screen grabs from the resource guide page. That's just the header. But if you see this very long screen grab here, this page is filled with resources, links, references, all kinds of stuff. So there's a lot of deep, rich knowledge out there that you can draw upon to try and, then deliver on the user story. But your user story remains key. Your user story is your touchstone. Am I still meeting the needs of my user? So there might be all of these different modules out there, but they're not quite doing the job. So you want to go back to your user story and say, is this what my user really wanted? This is a screen grab of a Drupal website, which has social media logos on the page so that they can easily be shared. Aha, maybe this will help me filter down through that mass of modules to one that's going to work for me. So I used my trusty Inspect Element tool and saw, service links. That's my clue. So I know this is a Drupal site that's doing what I want. So maybe I can shortcut my research and figuring out what to do next by using that module. So the service links modules, drupal.org/project/service_links, away I go. If I scrolled further down that page and it wasn't just a screenshot of the top of it, I could see that it was in use on 40,000 websites. That seems, pretty popular, probably does the job. So I'm going to also use that as a shortcut. And it ticks off what the two things my user really wanted, that the logos were there on the page so they could easily share with different social media that they're on. And it also pre-populates the post so that they can share very quickly and easily that content. So user stories are requirements, but they are beyond and before, I think, as a way of thinking about them. You can craft these stories after having conversations with your users, with your stakeholders, or by surveying the space that you're in, the competitive analysis, and develop all of these little stories about the things that you want on your website. So I kind of see them as kind of the same, but fundamentally different, which is totally makes no sense whatsoever, but somehow works for me. That you can't really talk about user stories without thinking about old-fashioned requirements, but you really need to start thinking about old-fashioned requirements, this is more important, in terms of what the actual user wants. How many of you have been working on a project and been told, oh no, but that's the requirements, it just has to be there. But there's not necessarily been a good user rationale for why that thing needs to be there. How many has that been true? How useful would it be to be able to turn back and say, well, let's look at what the user story might be behind that. And maybe it's an opportunity for us to build less stuff just because it's on the list and bring the focus back onto what's the real value to our user. Do we know who our users are? Are we meeting their needs? And bringing that back to the heart of that requirements gathering and then implementing process. So user stories are requirements, but kind of better, I guess. So I've got a bunch of references. I think I've just powered through that very quickly in was it only 30 seconds or a little bit longer? A bunch of references that I've kind of touched on as I've been talking. The slides will go up online and so don't feel like you have to write these out, you can get these later. But they're really just the tip of the iceberg. There's lots and lots and lots of stuff out there on all of this material. One of the ones that is here and I haven't really talked about is story mapping. And I think I've got a little bit of time, so I want to go into that a bit. So you've got these user stories, they're quite distinct, right? They're about a very small piece of your puzzle. Who's heard of story mapping before today? Less of you, okay. So story mapping is about bringing those little tiny user stories back into the big picture and mapping it out. Written by a guy called Jeff Patton, I think. The link, yeah, Jeff Patton Associates, I've put the direct source there. Really useful approach for bringing those user stories back into a cohesive whole. Because I think this is one of the downsides to user stories, is you can get so focused on the detail, you've lost sight of the big picture. And so story mapping is your kind of key to bringing that back together. The other things there, the resource guides for the social media and Drupal, just there because I referenced it and it's easy to, if you want to get to that. The Wunderkraut, if you're not familiar with Wunderkraut, they're a European-based Drupal agency who are real agile experts. So they actually kind of gravitate in both the Drupal world and the agile world, and they've got a bunch of materials on how you bring agile and Drupal together. I might be a bit of a fangirl, but I'm not associated with them in any way. They're just really good at what they do. So Wunderkraut is a great source of reference and materials for learning about this stuff. And the others are more, generic kind of user story kind of references. But really, take your favourite search engine, type in user stories, agile, Drupal, etc., and you'll be flooded with a wealth of information on this stuff. It's a kind of a learning explosion once you kind of dig into it. So that's that. And then finally, that's thank you. But I think we've probably got time for some questions and a chat, especially as that was very introductory and you're all experts. And maybe you can teach me something now too. Yes?
Going through the process at the moment of defining the system we're building, coming up with user stories, as I'm breaking them down into the tasks to actually make the user story work, I'm finding that some of those tasks cross over with other user stories, and I'm not quite sure how to deal with that scenario. Like, if I had the same issue, or using Jira, so if I had the same issue and I link it up to the two user stories, or create two sets of user stories, just wanted to get your input on that.
So for the recording, I'm going to try and repeat the question. What happens when you're decomposing a large story and you break it down into tasks, and you find that some of those tasks overlap in some other user story? And how might you do that? And I think you answered the question there yourself, in that the tool that you're using, in this case Jira, allows you to link those two together. And I think that's exactly right. I think one of the next steps is, if you have exactly the same kind of functionality meeting the needs of two different users, or two different, or in different features, then that's an opportunity to really say, well, can we build this once and have it meet both needs? And I think that's the way to go. And you can close one down as a dupe, or it's a chance to kind of explore it further and say, actually, no, this shouldn't be the same. We've clearly missed something, and we need to refine this differently. Does that help? Cool. Yes?
Do you have a strategy in this if the client doesn't know what they want?
Yes, and that's the prototype and iterate. The minute a client sees something, they'll tell you very quickly it's not what they wanted. Or flip side, they go, how did you read my mind? But it's an opportunity to then have that conversation.
Yep, all right.
Good question. Sorry, for the recording, the question was, what do you do if you have a client who doesn't know what they want? Reverse Jeopardy. Any more questions? Is that a good client?
So if you're managing a really, really large website, how do you go about finding the stories you want to target?
So I think one of the key elements to the user story process is about determining value. Like in Agile, you want to build the most valuable things first and fastest. So you start with those. So you might have, a backlog of thousands and thousands of features and stuff, but you've only got 2 weeks. So you're going to say, well, what's going to deliver the most bang for our buck? And where you bring in that minimum viable product idea. But I think that concept of starting with the big picture epics and breaking them down, or decomposing, as the lingo suggests, into smaller pieces, smaller bite-sized chunks that you can more easily implement, is part of that challenge. And the real thing about user stories, and all the literature keeps saying, is it's about a conversation. It's about starting somewhere and then progressively drilling down. Does that sort of answer the question?
Yeah, sure.
Cool. Anyone else? Big smile from Sai. Hi, Sai. No more questions? Then we can all, have a moment of reflection and meditation, breathe in and breathe out, and I'll hand over to our next presenter. Thank you all so very much.